Chinese President Xi Jinping will talk over the phone with the U.S. President Joe Biden upon invitation on March the 18th. That's according to the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This came within days after senior representatives from both sides met for 7 hours in Italy. What can we expect from this call at such a critical juncture? On what issues can the two sides find common ground, if at all? And what implications could this call have on the world? Joining me today in the studio is Aina Tangen, independent current affairs commentator, and from India, Atul Anija, editor of the news website India Narrative. Gentlemen, welcome to The Point. So a quick mention to the background. Chinese President Xi Jinping and U.S. President Joe Biden will have their first phone call of the year. China said Chinese President Xi Jinping will exchange views with U.S. President Joe Biden upon invitation on China-U.S. relations and issues of mutual concern. The White House said President Joe Biden will speak with Chinese President Xi this Friday. This is part of, quote-unquote, our ongoing efforts to maintain open lines of communication between the two sides. The two leaders will discuss managing the competition between our two countries, as well as Russia's war against Ukraine and other issues of mutual concern. So, Aina, let me go to you first. How do you read the messages behind the arrangement of this meeting? Who's calling who and why now?
Biden's calling Xi. I think he believes that his relationship with Xi will somehow tip the balance and prevent, or at least try to get China to condemn Russia. And I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, it's interesting if you start looking at the stylistic differences between Biden and also Trump. You know, Trump was financially transactional. Biden seems to be politically transactional. And what I mean by that is he's really playing to the domestic audience in a year that looks very, very tough with all the inflation, all the internal disputes, while they're just about to have an election in this fall.
Atul, what is your reading into this setup of this phone call? Obviously, as I said, senior representatives from both countries met for 7 hours in Rome, which obviously led to this call. What could they expect to come out of it?
Well, if you look at the big picture, Lucian, then I think from the US point of view, and this goes back way down to what thinkers like Brzezinski had visualized, that in Eurasia, China and Russia should not come together. I mean, that was the game which was played for a very long time. For US, this is a nightmare of Russia and China coming together on the Ukrainian issue, not exactly on the same page, but China saying that it is willing to play a neutral and a constructive role in ending this conflict. So I think from a US perspective, if you look at it in a geopolitical sense, this would be a historic moment to try and test out whether they can once again drive this separation or a wedge between Russia and China. And I don't think that's going to succeed because we are in a multipolar era. Unfortunately, the US has been unable to grasp this, that it is not the only power in the world. And China, Russia, emerging economies, India included, there's a new world order which has emerged. And I think US is trying to still reimpose a unipolar world. And I think this phone call is again a way to test where they can recreate the kind of situation which happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union. I don't think they're going to succeed.
So what is the strategy on the part of the United States, Aina? For instance, they talked for 7 hours. Okay, they must have talked about something so substantive, or they must have had a stalemate that they couldn't leave the room without reaching their goals, and there were no readout from the meeting in Rome. So, and if the U.S. cannot get something out of this phone call, why embarrass themselves?
Well, as I said, I mean, it's part of it. It's why did Jake Sullivan, prior to the meeting, to start talking about things that, you know, he has no proof of. He said, Russia has asked for reinforcements from China to help with the war effort. Well, China's position has been consistently, please do not pour, gasoline on the fire by adding more munitions to either side. Saying that, if China doesn't back down and do what the U.S. wants, there will be repercussions, secondary sanctions, etc. So, at this time, it seems like it's all, jingoistic talk. They're push, 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 threaten, 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 kind of bully things, see what China's reaction is. And It just doesn't make any sense, but it reveals something much larger. There really is no end game, unless the end game is to push Putin into a corner, create regime change, possibly his death, and a complete bedlam within Russia itself, a country with the largest stockpile of nuclear weapons in the world. I mean, this, if you take it on its face, is insane.
Atul, how do you look at the end game, if there is one, for the United States in their vision? Do they have an idea what exactly they want to achieve vis-a-vis the situation in Ukraine?
I think the Americans are living in denial, to be very honest. I agree with Einar that the end game could be, again, going by what they did Unipolar World 1990, to again recreate that by trying to spur a regime change in Russia. And that seems to be at least a strong lobby will try and do that. After all, if you look at it historically, they have tried regime changes in the Middle East. Iran was at one time on the radar. I'm talking of the Bush administration's time, etc. And then, if the end game would have been regime change in Russia and possibly in China, this would be these kind of thinkers which are there in the United States. So I think, and I also think that the West would try to do that, and the Americans especially, through an internal upsurge within Russia. I don't think any of that is going to happen. And Russians have their own strategic goals. In order to achieve their objective, they would want China to be on their side. The problem, Lucian, is more fundamental. The problem is that you are looking in zero-sum game terms. That either we are the losers, we are the winners. The world has changed. It needs collaboration and cooperation with all the poles which have emerged. I don't think the United States has moved from that Cold War mentality to a mentality which is required to manage a multipolar world. And that's where players like China and Russia are coming in.
But it's appalling to imagine that the U.S. the Biden administration, surrounded by these, very experienced strategists and advisors, that they would not see the infeasibility of what they want, which is the regime change in Russia, or eventually a regime change in China. Maybe they think there is a good chance. Look, the United States has a lot of power. Maybe not so much the military power, but it has a lot of followings among the West in both hard and soft ways. Einar.
This is not Afghanistan. I mean, this isn't less than 10 million people who you're invading. This is the world's largest nuclear power. This is not an area where you start experimenting. I completely agree with Atul. The age of American exceptionalism still lives on in the minds of many of the hawks in D.C., and it is transactional. A lot of this is for domestic politics. So, unfortunately,
in what specific ways, for instance, Einar?
Biden is hoping that this is the one issue that will unite Americans and give him some oxygen as he goes into this very, very contentious midterm election where right now he's expecting to lose.
At what cost?
Well, this is the problem. In America, politics and policy are so intermerged. In fact, most policy is made based on the politics. They're responding to what they think will keep them in power as opposed to what has to be done. So, I mean, it's very easy when you're in the political war room to say, listen, we need a way to bring the American people together, being tough on China, being tough on Russia. That's the way to do it. We'll set up Ukraine as this bastion of heroes and people who are resisting oppression and things like that, and we'll use that in the midterms. And that's exactly the kind of thinking. I was involved in running campaigns, and I know how they think. It's always about winning.
Atul, what's your take, and what's the cost, what's the potential cost, if this is really the case, for Ukraine, and for Ukrainians, and for the Europeans?
Well, quite frankly, the Ukrainians are waking up to the new realities. You already have Zelensky saying that I've been dished by the West and nobody has come to my aid. And you can see.
But the United States is sending, look, what is it, $2 billion of defense aid by now?
You see,
but that's not what they need. They want an air.
Then there will be no boots on the ground. I don't see Zelensky or Ukraine standing a chance to the firepower which Russia has. So they were looking for a more solid Western support coming in, and that has not come in. And you have seen the Americans ditching what happened the Afghans. So when you club it together, I don't think America is looking all that great the way it is treating its potential allies. So I think that's going to go negatively in terms of global perception of the United States, the way they have treated Ukraine. And I do see, frankly, the bilateral track between the Ukrainians and the Russians moving quite solidly towards a formulation or a framework of a dialogue where final resolution can take place. I think we might see a dialogue between Zelensky and Putin taking place not too long or too far away, and that would mean the redundancy or the marginalization of the United States, despite all the rhetoric which is coming from there.
But what about the idea of democracy? I mean, the United States has been talking about promoting democracy, bringing democracy to the people of Ukraine, even to the people of Russia. Aina, does the U.S. see that as an important, legitimate cause to garner all of the support, all of the resources it could have, including China, to establish that system?
Well, despite all the messages contrary, Russia is a democracy, and so is Ukraine. They have elected governments. There was a putsch back in when the former president decided that he wanted to annul the contract with the agreement with Europe and switch to Russia. He was thrown out. Yeah. It was literally a revolution. But the fact is, this idea that they're defending democracy is nonsense. The U.S. said that, oh yes, they egged on Ukraine, as Atul pointed out, and then they left them high and dry. And this seems to be a consistent pattern, whether it's Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, you name it. So yeah, there's a lot of reconsideration going around about just how sincere the U.S. is when it's encouraging a nation that cannot stand up to the military might of Russia to go out there because we have your back. We'll make it impossible for them.
What is at stake for the United States, however, at this moment? It seems that the United States is pretty desperate in trying to get China stop, helping Russia in whatever way. What is the U.S. afraid of losing?
Well, exactly what Atul says. They have this sense that they have a moral high ground to be the policeman of the world and to enforce a liberal democratic order on anybody, even at the point of a gun, or destabilization of other economies and countries.
What does it make countries such as China and India, does it make it easier for these countries to really work with the United States? Because as usual, before the two presidents talk or before the two sides talk, we've heard very harsh rhetorics, right? For instance, the U.S. spokesperson, White House spokesperson threatened of significant consequences if China is helping Russia, or sometimes they would define whether China is helping or not.
It's same tune, different day. I mean, on a daily basis, you're getting new bills in Congress that are demonizing China, putting people on blacklists, making accusations of which they have no proof. So, I mean, I don't know how this is different. This is just more of the same. And it's odd that, this hasn't worked. The sanctions didn't work against Russia. It hasn't worked against Iran. It hasn't worked at all. And yet, the U.S., first thing they go to is, in fact, sanctions.
Right. And the U.S. also threatened to sanction India if India doesn't comply. And we just had heard from Wall Street Journal that India actually inked a deal to buy discounted Russian crude oil from Russia, 3 million barrels. So, Atul, how do you look at the level of cooperation from India to help the United States achieve its goals?
No, I don't see that's coming, and I'm not. The world should not be surprised because India has exercised its own strategic autonomy, which is based on its own national interests. We have a very strong relationship with Russia. We not only, first of all, on the domestic audience, there is a strong goodwill for Russia for historical reasons. Then we have they are our major defense partners, and our Eurasia policy is, and Eurasian Economic Union is another thing which is on India and Russia's radar. Common. So there are various factors which bind India and Russia together. So I think it was delusional from the American point of view to assume that India will back with the United States and the Western countries on this issue.
So,
it has exercised strategic autonomy. I think I just want to add one thing, that this is an opportunity for the BRICS countries, for the emerging economies, India, China, Russia, South Africa, the developing countries to come together. I think it's a moment, inflection point.
But people would say, a lot of people would have a hard time or acknowledging that, because they would say, after all, Russia invaded Ukraine, a sovereign country. Does India, for instance, not have a moral dilemma on this?
Not at all, because each country, frankly, has its own Monroe Doctrine. The Americans have its geopolitics, and Russian security, we understand, is based on preventing NATO's expansion. If Ukraine becomes a part of NATO, as is Georgia, this is something which is fundamental to Russian security interests, and we understand that. So I see no moral dilemma coming here to take a neutral position and trying to bridge the gap and dialogue between these two.
Okay, time has run out. Thank you so much, Aina Tangan and Atul Anija, joining us from Beijing and India.